Today, Wargaming probably just released one of the most broken, if not the most broken tank that has ever been released within World War II. And it's this one right here. And of course, this tank is primarily a Black Friday vehicle that has come out. It is the T259 Black for World of Tanks console. And this thing features a ridiculous 37mm T250 Gatling that is one of the, quite possibly the best weapons that you can have within the game, at least in terms of close quarters and when you have a bit of speed. And of course the Vigilante, which is we're going to be calling this tank from this point, is a super fast light tank. It goes 68 kilometers an hour, which is pretty decent. It's up there with some of the best kind of light tanks, and it's certainly way above any of the mediums and stuff that you'll meet within the game. So think of it almost like a slower light tank, but very fast medium tank. And it also gets all of the benefits of being a light tank in that you have ridiculous view range, and your concealment is also very good. You can see here we got 228 meters of still concealment, but the main thing with this vehicle is the fact that it has 9,000 damage per minute. And not only that, this tank has 25 damage every single shell it fires. And you might be thinking, okay, so it must have like, you know, 100 shells or something like that. Well, 100 shells of 25 damage would be 2,500 damage in one singular clip. But no, this tank has 192 shots in its clip, meaning that it has nigh on like 4.2 thousand damage in that time that it can unload. And the intraclip reload of this thing is 0.02, meaning that you can fire off 50 shells in 1 second and a total of basically 100 shells in 2 seconds. 100 shells, as we said, is 2,500 damage, provided that you pen every single one of those, which I'm not going to say that you were going to pen every single one of them, but if you do, that's 2,500 damage. And so in the space of 4 seconds from firing this tank, you will have been able to deal about 4,200 damage in total. So the entire clip in just under 4 seconds, which, if you're thinking about this tank, is basically not possible in any other tank in the game. We made jokes about the fact that it would be funny to have a waffle with, you know, 4 shots of 1,000 alpha like the Jaeger gun. Well, this is basically that, except the fact that it fires off little tiny rounds, and of course these only have 75 pen, which is on the low side. So you are not going to be able to pen a whole lot, but you can pen almost every tank bar the super heavies and heavy tanks from the rear, which means if you use your speed and mobility to go up right behind a vehicle and just unload all of your shells into the backside of it, the tank is gone in like 2 seconds. I mean, for me, for example, I came up behind a Super Conqueror who probably thought I'm going to try and have a good game, and no, I just rocked up behind him, and 2,400 damage later I was rolling off after about 2 seconds, and we didn't even take a hit, I don't think, when we did manage to push this guy. So it's utterly broken in the way that it comes into the game, in the fact that you can just ruin someone's game and there is zero chance of them being able to do anything. The only way a player can actually play against a player that is decent in this vehicle is the fact that they're going to have to try and one-shot ammo rack, and that is relying on RNG. So if a good player in a Vigilante manages to come up against a heavy tank that's in the open, which a good player should be attempting to go for, you're going to find that there is no room for anyone to back up, which basically means if you're playing any of the heavy tanks and you don't have, 80mm of rear end armor, that you're most likely going to be taking a lot of damage, if not the entire hit point pool of your tank, from just meeting one of these in the game. And especially currently, because it's just been released, everyone's trying it out and playing it, you're seeing like 3-4 of these in every single one of your games, which is a testament to how good the tank is, because it's very rare that we see a tank come into the game and the actual list full of the brand new tank that isn't from an earn operation or a season pass or an ultimate pass or whatever, that it is just filled in the lobby. And yeah, when it comes to the tank overall, I want to state this very clearly. I don't think that this tank is overpowered, but what I do want to state is that this is the most broken tank, I think, in the game, and has probably ever been in the game. Because even if we look at something like a Centurion AVRE, it has HE rounds, which are innately broken, the fact that it doesn't have to aim, and it can deal damage all of the time, and occasionally it will find an opponent that it can just pen, and you'll also find that the tank is just annoying to fight against. So in terms of how it actually plays, it's not that great because there's a lot of downfall flaws with playing that tank, but it is incredibly difficult to play against if you're in a 1 versus 1, and so often it becomes broken, but it doesn't necessarily mean over the course of an entire game that it's going to be able to do really good things. Playing in a light tank against an AVRE is very difficult because of the fact it can one-shot you and just remove you from the game. But if you're coming up against a mouse that knows what he's doing and knows the weak points of the AVRE is pretty bad. I mean, it's not going to be able to do a whole lot. So although these sorts of tanks are innately like good or like decent, the problem with them is that they are so good at one specific thing, and that one specific thing is eliminating a tank within like half a second, if not a second, that you're going to essentially end up with these tanks just YOLOing in and taking out one tank in order to win the game. Or at least have some damage more so than they would normally do with every other tank, because you actually have to use a mechanic that isn't just rocking up behind someone and holding the RT button. We would have had a massive problem with the fact that there was just auto aim central right now on console, and adding in tanks like this that promote the just basically the blitzing of flanks by just going around and picking the first guy that you can pen and just YOLOing him with him not being able to do anything, making it very, very annoying for basically anyone playing the game. I've played this tank probably in the region about 5-6 times, something like that, and we got a good gist for how it's actually going to play. As I say, I don't think this tank is overpowered. What I am saying is that it's completely broken when you do manage to find someone that you can pen. And in terms of how it feels playing this tank, yes, it's really fun to rock up behind someone and completely take out their entire hit point pool, but in the scenarios where you can't pen anyone, or maybe you're reloading, the tank is utterly dull. All you are is basically a spotting light tank. So yes, you can do that and it's absolutely fine, but some games you'll find that you can't actually just rock up and deal with opponents. Maybe you're on a town map or whatever, and so it becomes much more difficult to do that. Now you can of course play good and you can outperform others, and provided your skill level is high enough, you can have very, very good games, and the best players are going to make use of these tanks far higher than you'll see, where they're able to actually do 3 times the damage that you're seeing a lot of the standard vehicle drivers of this one, because they can survive the game. And that's where the difference is. So I think in terms of like the overall top end of the vehicle, it's probably way higher for skilled players, and like the average player is probably going to clip 1 person, maybe 2 people, and then they're done because they're out of the game, they've been taken out, maybe they made poor choices. And considering this tank only has 1100 hit points, probably the lowest of all tier 10s in the game, makes it very, very squishy, and so yeah, horrendous when you are playing tier 10. Now we've of course been talking a lot about tier 10, but remember, tier 10 can be tier up against tier 9s and tier 8s, and you might be thinking, well, okay, let's take a look at some of the tier 10s or tier 9s in the game. So if we go over to, for example, the E75, and we select this tank, let's actually have a look at it. And if we go to the armor model, you can see that the rear armor of the tank, if we find it, is 120mm thick. So you're fine from the rear armor to actually absorb the rounds when you're playing in the E75. But what about if we grab up, for example, the VK4502A, which is a tier 8 vehicle, and unfortunately for it, it has 80mm of armor, which, if you take into account the fact that pen can high roll and low roll, that the new vehicle is going to be able to go through this tank, and it definitely will. This is supposed to be a heavy tank, and realistically you shouldn't be able to just go around and basically pen it in the side or the rear of the tank. This is especially bad for tanks that are primarily just flat armoured vehicles with no spaced armour or anything like that. And then a similar sort of story when you go over to the Tiger 2, where you've got a similar sort of armor profile where you've got 80mm at the rear and on the rear of the turret and on the sides. So if a tank like the new one comes up to the side of you, well, your 1700 hit points are disappearing pretty much every single time. And even if the new tank does manage to rock up beside you but only pens half of their shots, it's still enough damage in that clip to be able to completely remove a tier 8 heavy, even when you miss half of your shots. And when you're so close to an opponent with the accuracy that we have in update 6.0 or since 6.0, and when all of the crew skills and the accuracy and everything changed to be much better, the accuracy on this tank is actually amazing, and you can actually fire on the move crazy good. Like, you're not missing a huge amount with the tank, which is yet another thing that Wargaming should have probably thought about, that maybe we should increase the bloom, but it was actually one of the things I was skeptical about when I looked at the vehicle. But of course, you know, that didn't actually happen. And of course, those were the German tanks. These are tanks with supposedly better armor. But of course, if you're looking at, you know, some of your light tanks that you'll be facing, if you play any other tank than the light tank, then it's basically impossible to take them out. You can play an autoloader, the AMX 13105, with, you know, your 3 shots of 390 alpha. But don't worry, because you can only get 1 shot off, and if you miss it, you're dead, because of the fact that you have low hit points and of the fact that you basically have absolutely no armor. So if we were to look at the 13105, its armor model, the maximum armor that this tank has is 50mm. So this thing is getting penned every single time a round hits the tank, and that means that within about a second of the tank firing, it is removing all of your hit points. Remember, 1 second of firing is essentially 50 rounds. So 50 rounds, lots of 25 is 1250. So just over a second of firing with the new tank, you're removing a full health AMX 13105. And depending on the reactions of the AMX 13105, they may not even have time to react to the fact that they're about to get clipped by you as you rock around the corner. So, you know, these sorts of things, these sorts of tanks and these mechanics are absolutely ludicrous, and I have no idea why Wargaming thought that, you know what, let's add some more tanks that basically are just horrific to play against, not too fun to actually play with, because they get basically just like, you have to be very switched on when you're playing them if you want to have good games where you're dealing, you know, consistent 5k damages in your games. But they can remove and just make other people's games that much worse. So it's a lose-lose for most of the people playing them, as well as, you know, just a complete loss for anyone that plays up against it that doesn't have, you know, 90mm of rear armor, where, you know, the plus 25% on RNG on penetration will not be able to actually impact or actually pen you at all. And the problem with not only this is that a lot of the other vehicle nations that aren't like Soviet or German, even the heavy tanks, so things like the French heavies, I believe probably in that sort of region where you can be just penned in the rear of the tank. I know that the Super Conqueror and the Americans and the British are especially bad, where you'll probably see here that the Chieftain, for example, has 25mm of rear armor. Yes, 25. That means that every single round that you hit into the back of a Chieftain is going to pen. And even the side armor here, if you can get through the tracks, so in between the tracks and the hull of the tank, 38mm, you can pen it in the side. Yeah, it is not looking good for any tank that is British, for American heavy tanks, whether that be, you know, just lower tier Soviet and German tanks, medium tanks. Basically anything that doesn't have 90 pen, you are in the region of being removed from the game, and that makes anyone going for marks of excellence, if you're at 84% and you're one good game away, and then one of these tanks rocks around that's a complete, like, terrible player, for example, rocks around but can auto hit you in the rear for, you know, all of your health within half a second at the very beginning of the game, because they decide to YOLO into a random position and then get subsequently taken straight out after taking you out, I'm pretty sure you're going to be very angry. And remember, even players that are going to be playing this tank will eventually not be playing the tank, and the exact same thing that they're doing to others is going to happen to them. And overall, this tank is just a toxic piece of garbage that I do not think Wargaming should ever have put into the game in the current state that it is. Could they have done some other things to make the tank way more balanced? Absolutely. And as I said before, all tanks that Wargaming bring in should potentially be not that great, so they can either buff them when they know that the tank is, oh look, it's actually underperforming, we can buff this tank, it's going to please everyone that is actually playing the tank, as well as not break the game at the same time. But no, let's introduce a tank that is just completely broken in one aspect of the game, meaning that no one has fun, and the fact that everyone is going to complain because of the fact that, you know, they've paid money to actually pick up this vehicle, most likely. Then yeah, this sort of tank, it's got to have some changes done to it. Wargaming are never going to make those changes because they know that either A, it's just a tactic to make some money, which yes, it will make them money, lots of people are going to buy the tank, but at what cost is that actually doing to the gameplay and the actual mode and everything that you're trying to build here? It's just detrimental in all regards, whether you are playing at tier 8 and above, or, you know, these sorts of tanks, they set a precedent for introducing tanks that are of a similar sort of level, that have the similar sort of playstyle, or have a similar sort of level of damage output, that now we may be seeing these sorts of tanks cropping up constantly within World War II, because everyone is now thinking that the new premium tanks have to be as broken as the T259 Black, and so let's introduce another broken premium that people are going to buy, because they don't seem to buy just the normal ones anymore. And the further you go with it, the more and more disparity between, you know, having this premium tank and, you know, a tech tree vehicle or another light tank like the Sheridan, the Manticore. I mean, nerfing the Manticore and bringing in the T249 is literally a middle finger. I do not even care. It is a complete middle finger. The Manticore, a tank with probably the most horrendous DPM, 1743 DPM, that's without a commander, so it'll go up to like 2k, compared to the T249 with 8000. You could miss 1 in every 4 shot, or 3 out of 4 shots, so you can miss 75% of your rounds when you're actually firing, and still have more DPM than the Manticore if it hits every single one of its shots. That is unbelievable to me. And the fact that the Manticore, let's just put a commander in it, for example, just because I'm on a rant and I want to showcase just how annoying it is that Wargaming keep doing this. They keep doing this. They're saying that they want to make the game better, and then they introduce tanks like this that, yes, might be that great, but it is toxic to the game. It is detrimental to anyone that plays the game, and especially the people who are paying their wages at the end of the day. Yeah, it's horrendous. So the Manticore, 68 kilometers an hour. T249, 68 kilometers an hour. Manticore gets 300 extra hit points, but at the cost of having 499 meters view range, as opposed to the 525 on the Vigilante. The still concealment of the Manticore, 234 versus the 228 on the Vigilante. So not only is the Vigilante got more vision, but it's also got more concealment, making it better at being able to stay hidden in the game. The fact that the Vigilante has a 29.8 horsepower to weight ratio, the Manticore has 40, so obviously that is much better. So top speed and the ability to get up to top speed is going to be better in the Manticore, so you have that advantage. But then, you know, the accuracy of the Manticore is pretty bad, whereas the Vigilante, when you are firing and at closer ranges, is much better. And so you end up in scenarios where the tank, this tank, if it's in a 1 versus 1 against pretty much every single one of the other light tanks, there's no chance. What are you going to do? There's literally no chance in another light tank against the 2249, which should never, ever, ever be in the game at all, in terms of the fact that you have 0 chance at actually dealing with someone, provided that 2 players have the exact same skill level. We're not talking about, well, I got taken out in my T249 by an AMX 13105 the other day. I'm talking about 2 exactly the same skilled players with the exact same crew skills, all of the equipment the exact same. There's nothing you can do when you're playing in a Manticore versus the T249. What are you going to do? You're going to wait, what, 11 seconds to fire off a second round for you know, 390 damage. By which point, after you've fired 2 rounds of the Manticore, the T259 is fully reloaded again and about to go on another 300 shot clip or 194 shot clip on you. So, you know, it's just a fat middle finger to anyone that actually is playing World War II light tanks, medium tanks, and we already knew that fast heavies were probably the best in the game right now because of the fact that accuracy is so much better. And so yeah, light tanks weren't in the greatest of places anyway, so let's bring in another one that is gonna just destroy other light tanks. And that is wargaming to a T. So we've listened to a lot about how they're gonna make the game better. I'm yet to see anything, and this is just yet again another example of what in the absolute... Anyway, at least I enjoyed yesterday where I got to play before this thing was in the game in my medium tanks, because I'm certainly not going to from this point onwards. If you want to join me on stream, I'll be streaming today where we'll probably play this thing on stream just to showcase what it's actually like, the downfalls, and answer any questions, queries. To you guys, do I think that this tank is worth buying? No, it's not really that fun. Is it absolutely broken? Yes. Is it overpowered? No. Is it the most competitive light tank out there? Probably not. Is it going to be better than every other light tank in a 1 versus 1? Yes. But does that make it competitive versus the other light tanks? I don't know. I don't think so. And pretty much all of the other ones have the advantage of being able to consistently deal damage and be able to pen things reliably, which means you can pen a mouse as opposed to this tank, which you just cannot pen a mouse ever. So either way, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.